I didn't know my heart could sound so loud. The rhythmic pounding in my chest seemed to outpace the wedding march as I watched my son Michael glide across the dance floor with his new bride, Sophia. Everything about this moment should have been perfect. The fairy lights twinkling overhead, the soft laughter floating through the air, the champagne fizzing in crystal glasses. But as I stood there among the wedding guests, my vision started to tunnel, and a cold sweat broke across my forehead. My last thought before the darkness claimed me was how handsome my son looked, and how he hadn't once looked in my direction all day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The chocolate cake in my left hand wobbled as I reached for the door handle. 47 candles waited in my kitchen drawer, a testament to the years I'd spent loving a son who seemed determined to forget I existed. I'd baked Michael's favorite double chocolate with cream cheese frosting, hoping this small gesture might bridge the widening chasm between us. Under my right arm was a small velvet box containing the antique pocket watch my father had left me, intended for my son on his wedding day. I'd had it cleaned, the mechanism serviced until it kept perfect time again. I imagined Michael carrying it during important moments of his married life, perhaps passing it down to his own son someday. Through the church's heavy wooden doors, May sunshine spilled in soft and gold, painting the vestibule with long shadows. I could hear the chatter inside, the easy rhythm of voices that didn't expect to be overheard. The smell of lilies drifted through the air, mingling with the faint tang of wedding day nervousness. I shifted the cake box, trying not to smudge the delicate piping I'd labored over that morning. Congratulations, Michael and Sophia. My palms were sweating, and I told myself it was just from carrying too much at once. Then Taylor's voice cut through, loud and carefree. Man, your dad wasn't invited? That's cold. Michael's voice followed, smooth and dismissive, a tone I'd heard too often lately. Yeah, well, he's trying to buy my affection as usual. Thinks gifts fix everything. The words landed like a hammer. I froze, my fingers tightening around the cake box until the cardboard flexed. Derek chimed in. At least he cares. My old man barely calls. Michael didn't miss a beat. I'm tired of him breathing down my neck about the wedding plans, taking responsibility, like he doesn't understand how stressful this is right now. I watched him gesture with his Bhutani air, the white rose catching the light before he adjusted it nervously. And then came the line, the one that split the day in half. Honestly, the best gift he could give me is to disappear from my son's wedding forever. It was said casually, almost lazily, but it was sharp enough to cut through the wood and into me. Taylor laughed. Derek shook his head with a smirk. From the pew, Sophia, her eyes never leaving her phone, called out, "You could always uninvite him." Michael shot back. With what explanation? He controls everything, acts like I'm still a kid. More laughter. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the cool metal of the door handle against my fingertips. 30 years of birthdays, soccer games, homework nights, and hospital visits reduced to a punchline. I took one slow step back from the door, careful not to make a sound. The cake tilted. I steadied it just in time. The velvet box under my arm felt like a lead weight. I set both down on a bench inside the vestibule without turning around. The church smelled faintly of the flowers I'd helped choose months ago, now arranged meticulously at the altar. I wouldn't see my son approach. The guest book was open on a small table, the pen I'd bought for this occasion, engraved with their names and wedding date, waiting for signatures from people who were welcome to witness this moment. It looked staged now, like a display in a store window. Beautiful, but not for me. I leaned against the wall, letting the muffled sounds of the string quartet fill the silence. Through the crack in the door, Michael was telling a story, something about me embarrassing him at the cake tasting last year. I could hear the laughter rise again. I don't remember deciding to sit down, but suddenly I was on the bench staring at the velvet box, my father's watch. Dad had worn it every day of his working life. He used to say a man's legacy is the only thing he can't buy back, so give it to those who will honor it. I'd spent almost 3 decades of my life on Michael. Shelter, food, tuition, down payment for his first condo, though we never told his mother about that. And now he wanted me gone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I thought about stepping inside, handing him the cake, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. That would be easier, quieter, keep the peace. But something in me had shifted. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was colder than that. Clearer, like the click of a gear sliding into place. From my seat, I could see through the crack in the door. Michael stood with his groomsmen, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through stained glass and illuminating them like figures in a painting they didn't deserve to be in. Taylor handed him a flask. Sophia finally looked up from her phone long enough to smile at something he said. I realized they were all standing on something I'd helped create. The wedding I'd contributed to financially, the flowers I'd selected with care, the venue I'd secured when their first choice fell through. And my son wanted me to vanish. I stood slowly, my knees protesting after years of carrying not just my weight, but the weight of his expectations. My reflection in the polished brass door handle looked unfamiliar. The set jaw, the narrowed eyes. I didn't open the door. Not yet. Instead, I picked up the cake and the watch, carried them back to my car, and set them on the passenger seat. The hum of voices faded as I closed the car door. I sat behind the wheel, elbows on the steering wheel, listening to the muffled sounds of the wedding preparations. I could still hear Michael's voice, animated, laughing. No idea his words had lodged like shrapnel. I looked at my watch. 4:42 p.m. By 5:45, the ceremony would begin, and everything would change. I don't remember deciding to go back inside, but at some point I found myself standing at the entrance again, listening to the voices through the half-open door. The laughter was louder now. Michael's voice rose above the rest in that confident tone he reserved for an audience. And then he told the florist we couldn't afford the premium package, right there in front of everyone, like I'm some kid asking for candy. Taylor's laughter hit the air first, sharp and immediate. Derek followed with a mocking, "Classic Thomas, huh? Always playing the martyr." Sophia's giggle was quieter, but not so quiet that I couldn't hear it from the vestibule. I stood there, hand on the wooden pew end, feeling the grain of the wood under my palm. The same church where I'd had him baptized 29 years ago. My love, my time, my money. I stepped inside quietly, each creak of my shoes blending with the murmur of conversations and the soft music from the string quartet. The church was filling now, the pews dotted with guests in formal attire. My eyes found the altar, where Michael stood with the pastor making last-minute adjustments to his cuffs. Taylor leaned in close, saying something that made him laugh so hard he nearly dropped his boutonniere. Derek was perched on the edge of a pew, tapping on his phone, talking to Sophia, who was supposedly hidden away in the bridal room but kept texting the groomsmen. "Michael," I said, loud enough to cut through the chatter. "Can we talk privately?" He turned, casual, not a hint of concern on his face. "If it's about the seating chart, we already finalized it." "It's not about the seating chart." A couple of heads turned. Sophia's mother glanced up from her program, eyebrows raised. Taylor took a slow sip from his flask, watching us. Michael shrugged, straightened his tie, and walked over. "All right, Dad. What's so urgent?" I stepped aside, gesturing toward the vestibule. "Outside, please." But he didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and stayed put. "Whatever you've got to say, you can say it here. We're all family now." I looked at the circle forming around us. Taylor, Derek, a couple of cousins I barely knew, and Sophia's mother, still seated, but watching now. Michael knew exactly what he was doing. "All right," I said quietly. "I heard what you said earlier about me." His expression didn't change. And I want to know if you meant it." He didn't blink. "Yeah, I meant it. You hover. You micromanage. You make everything about your expectations. I'm getting married, Dad. I don't need you running my life." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Taylor smirked. 30 years of effort distilled into a public indictment. "You're using my money for this wedding," I said evenly. "My connections for the venue, my time for the planning, and you want me gone?" He shrugged. "I didn't ask you for any of that. You chose to give it. That's on you." It was like watching a stranger wearing my son's face. The same eyes, the same jawline, but the words were foreign, sharp-edged. Taylor clapped him on the shoulder. "He's got a point, Mr. Hanson. Parents choose to have kids. You don't get a medal for feeding them." The heat in my chest flared. but I kept my voice steady. Feeding them is one thing. Paying for their wedding at 30 is another. Michael's smile was thin. I'm sure you'll get over it. And when you finally do disappear, I'll miss your checkbook for maybe a week. Then we'll figure something out. Sophia's mother laughed nervously. This is getting a bit intense, she said. But her tone carried no genuine concern. I looked at each of them in turn, my son, his friends, his soon-to-be mother-in-law, standing in a church I'd helped secure, wearing clothes I'd contributed to, preparing for a reception I'd largely financed. Not one of them looked even mildly uncomfortable with what he'd said. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about one bad day. This was who Michael had become. The string quartet still played, though softer now, as if even the violins were waiting to see what I'd do. I felt every eye on me, waiting for me to snap, to shout, to make a scene they could talk about later. Instead, I stepped closer to Michael and said, "You want me gone? Be careful what you wish for." I turned, walked down the aisle, and left them to their whispers. Outside in my car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the cake box on the passenger seat. The watch gleamed softly in its velvet nest, catching the late afternoon sun. My father's voice echoed in my head. A man's legacy is the only thing he can't buy back. I'd wasted too much of mine trying to make Michael see me as more than a bank account. That ended today. I started the engine and pulled away from the church, leaving behind the sound of bells that would soon announce a wedding I wasn't welcome to attend. By the time I arrived home, the decision was already made. I walked through the front door of my empty house. Michael had moved out years ago, but his presence still lingered in photos on the walls. In the spare room I kept ready for visits that rarely came. I set the cake on the kitchen counter and opened the velvet box one more time. The watch caught the light, beautiful and untouched. I closed the box with a soft snap and placed it in my desk drawer alongside a folder containing wedding receipts, venue contracts, and catering confirmations, all with my name on them. That night, I made a list. Not a frantic, emotional scrawl, but a methodical inventory of steps to take. 1. Cancel remaining payments on wedding services. 2. Contact my lawyer. 3. Revise my will. 4. Pack only what matters. As I wrote each item, I felt the weight lifting slightly. This wasn't about punishment. It was about finally drawing a line that should have been drawn years ago. I slept that night with the list on my nightstand, a reminder that tomorrow would be different. When morning came, I moved with purpose. I called vendors, explaining the situation in simple terms. The father of the groom would no longer be covering expenses. I called my lawyer, arranging a meeting for the following day. I started sorting through my belongings, separating what I needed from what I'd accumulated out of habit or sentiment. By afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly. First Sophia's mother, then the wedding planner, finally Michael himself. I let each call go to voicemail. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a boundary. When I finally listened to the messages hours later, they followed a predictable arc, from confusion to indignation to barely concealed panic. The final one from Michael came at 9:43 p.m. Dad. His voice wavered between anger and desperation. What the hell? The venue called saying their final payment is overdue. The caterer wants to know who's handling the bar tab now, and Sophia is freaking out. If this is about yesterday, you're overreacting. Call me back. Now. I didn't. Instead, I poured myself a glass of scotch and sat on my patio, watching the stars emerge one by one. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without calculating the cost of each inhale. The wedding was in 3 days. I had already decided I wouldn't be there, not out of spite, but because I'd finally understood that my presence was valued only for what it could provide. As I sipped my scotch, I made another decision. I would use the money I'd saved for their gift, a honeymoon in Bali, to finally take the trip to Montana I'd been postponing for years. I'd leave the day before the wedding, ensuring I wouldn't be tempted to give in if Michael made a last-minute plea. The knocking started at 7:15 the next morning. Insistent, urgent knocks that said the person on the other side believed their emergency entitled them to my immediate attention. I opened the door to find Michael, unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or stress, or both. "What are you doing?" he demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. "The wedding is falling apart, and you're, what, teaching me a lesson?" I closed the door quietly. No lesson, I said. Just consequences. He paced my living room, running his hands through his hair. This is insane. You can't just pull funding 3 days before the wedding. What about all the guests? What about Sophia? What about me? I asked, my voice steady. You made it very clear I wasn't wanted except for my checkbook. I'm simply honoring your wishes by removing myself completely. He stopped pacing, his face flushing. I didn't mean it like that. It was just talk, just blowing off steam with the guys. No, I said. It wasn't. It was the truth you've been too comfortable to admit until now. You see me as an ATM with paternal obligations, not as a person with feelings who deserves respect. He stared at me, mouth working silently for a moment. So that's it. You're punishing me for one comment. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm finally respecting myself enough to walk away from someone who doesn't value me. The wedding can still happen. You'll just need to adjust your expectations or find the money elsewhere. He looked around wildly, as if searching for something to grab onto. Mom won't help. You know that. We can't come up with that kind of money in 3 days. Then perhaps you should have considered that before telling me the best gift I could give you was to disappear from your wedding. His shoulders slumped, defeat washing over his features. Dad, please. I'm sorry, okay? I was an ass. But don't take this out on Sophia. She's innocent in this. I felt a twinge then, not of guilt, but of sadness for the woman who was marrying a man who could so easily dismiss his own father. The watch, I said, walking to my desk and retrieving the velvet box. This was meant for you. I won't withhold it. It's your legacy now, not mine to reclaim. I handed him the box. As for the rest, you're 30 years old, Michael. It's time you learn that words have power, and actions have consequences. He took the box, his hand trembling slightly. The wedding is at 3 on Saturday, he said, his voice small. Will you at least be there? I looked at my son, seeing both the man he'd become and the boy he'd once been. No, I said gently. I won't. You asked for my absence, and it's the one gift I can still give freely. He left without another word, the velvet box clutched in his hand like a talisman. The rest of the day passed in a blur of purpose. I booked my flight to Montana, arranged for a rental car, confirmed my accommodations in a small town near Glacier National Park. I contacted my lawyer again, finalizing changes to my will and financial arrangements. I wasn't disinheriting Michael, that would be petty, but I was restructuring my assets to protect both of us from future patterns of enabling and entitlement. By evening, my phone had exploded with texts and calls, from Sophia, her mother, even Taylor, whose message held thinly veiled accusations of paternal failure. I responded to none of them. This boundary would only hold if I maintained it completely. The only message I did answer came from my brother James, who had never particularly liked Michael's attitude but had kept his opinions mostly to himself. Thomas, he wrote, Michael called me in a panic, said you've lost your mind and abandoned him before his wedding. What's really happening? I called him immediately. James answered on the first ring. Okay, spill it, he said without preamble. I told him everything, the overheard conversation, the confrontation, my decision to withdraw financial support but still give Michael the watch. When I finished, there was a long silence. Well, James finally said, it's about damn time. I laughed, a sound that surprised me with its lightness. You think I did the right thing? I think you did the only thing, he replied. That boy has been taking advantage of your guilt since the divorce. He needed this wake-up call 15 years ago, but today will have to do. He paused. Are you really going to Montana? Flight leaves Friday morning, I confirmed. Good, he said firmly. Send me pictures of every mountain, every sunset, and every trout you catch. You've earned this, Thomas. Don't you dare feel guilty about it. After we hung up, I packed my suitcase with a lighter heart than I'd felt in years. James was right. I had earned this, not just the trip, but the freedom that came with finally standing up for myself. Friday morning dawned clear and bright. I checked my phone one last time before leaving for the airport. 3 missed calls from Michael, 2 from Sophia, and 1 text message that made me pause. Dad, I need you there. Please. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Then I remembered his words in the church, the casual cruelty, the laughter of his friends. I set the phone down without responding and wheeled my suitcase to the waiting car. As the plane lifted off American soil, I felt a curious sensation, like I was leaving behind more than just a city. I was leaving behind decades of putting myself last, of measuring my worth by my usefulness to others, of confusing sacrifice with love. The wedding would happen tomorrow, with or without my financial backing, with or without my presence. And for the first time, the outcome wasn't my responsibility. When I landed in Montana, I turned my phone back on to find a surprising message from Sophia. "I understand why you're not coming. Michael told me everything. I'm sorry. We're scaling back the wedding, but it's still happening. I'll make sure he treasures the watch and what it represents. Have a good trip." It wasn't forgiveness I was seeking, but the acknowledgement felt like a small bridge across a wide chasm. I smiled as I deleted the message and collected my rental car. The Montana landscape unfurled before me like a canvas painted with every shade of green and gold. I drove with the windows down, letting the crisp air clear my mind. The small town where I'd booked a room welcomed me with wide streets and the scent of pine trees. My cabin overlooked a river that stretched toward distant mountains, and as I unpacked, I realized I'd brought exactly what I needed and nothing more. That night, I sat on the porch of a local restaurant, dining alone but not lonely. The waiter brought me a glass of local whiskey without me asking, a simple kindness that brought an unexpected lump to my throat. "You celebrating something?" he asked. Noticing my emotion, I considered the question. "Yes," I said finally, "my independence." He nodded as if this made perfect sense and brought me an extra portion of pie on the house. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple I'd only seen in paintings, I thought about Michael standing at the altar without me. There was sadness there, of course. What father doesn't dream of seeing his child married? But there was peace, too. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. Both of us were living with the consequences. I raised my glass to the fading light. "To boundaries," I whispered. "And to new beginnings." The whiskey burned pleasantly, tasting of earth and smoke and possibilities I'd forgotten existed. Tomorrow, halfway across the country, my son would become a husband. And I would become, at long last, myself. The first thing I remember when I regained consciousness was the harsh fluorescent lighting. It buzzed overhead like angry bees, making my eyes water as they struggled to focus. Hospital. I was in a hospital. The antiseptic smell hit me next, along with the steady beep of monitors tracking my stubborn heart. A nurse with kind eyes leaned over me, her voice gentle but urgent. "Mr. Hansen. Thomas, can you hear me? You're at Memorial Hospital. You collapsed at your son's wedding reception." My son's wedding. The memories flooded back. Michael spinning Sophia across the dance floor, their faces flushed with joy and champagne. The string quartet playing that Pachelbel piece she'd insisted on. The towering cake I'd helped select but wasn't acknowledged for. The crushing pressure in my chest when I realized no one had saved me a seat at the family table. How long? My voice emerged as a croak, barely audible over the machine's steady rhythm. "About 6 hours, the nurse replied, adjusting something on my IV. "It's just past midnight. You had a mild heart attack. The doctor will be in shortly to explain everything." 6 hours. The reception would be over by now. Michael and Sophia probably dancing their last dance, cutting the cake, tossing the garter, all those moments fathers dream of witnessing. All those moments I'd missed, because my heart had finally expressed what I couldn't. "This hurts too much. Did anyone—" I couldn't finish the question, but the nurse understood. "Your brother James is in the waiting room. He's been here since you arrived." She hesitated, her eyes flickering away briefly. "No one else has come by yet." No one else. Not my son. Not his new wife. Not even after I'd collapsed in front of 200 guests. An ambulance screaming into the country club driveway. Paramedics rushing through the reception with a stretcher. My absence hadn't disrupted their perfect day. They'd simply continued without me. The door opened and James burst in, his face tight with worry. "Thomas!" "Thank God!" He rushed to my bedside, squeezing my shoulder with a firm grip. My brother, always there, always steady. The one constant in my increasingly lonely life. "The wedding?" I managed to ask. James's expression darkened. "They kept going. I couldn't believe it. You were being loaded into an ambulance. And Michael just told the band to keep playing. said you wouldn't want the party ruined. He shook his head. I came with you immediately. Couldn't stomach staying there after that. I closed my eyes, absorbing this final confirmation of where I stood in my son's life. Not even a medical emergency could compete with his special day. I'd become truly invisible, exactly what he'd wished for at the church all those months ago. The doctor says it was stress-induced, James continued, his voice gentler now, combined with your high blood pressure. Thomas, why didn't you tell me things were this bad? I hadn't told him because saying it out loud would make it real. That the child I'd raised alone after his mother left, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, had grown into a man who could watch his father collapse and then return to his waltz without missing a beat. It doesn't matter now, I said, turning my face toward the window. Outside, the world continued its spin, indifferent to my small heartbreak. Just like my son, Dr. Reynolds arrived just after 1 a.m., a tall man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many patients pretend they were fine when they weren't. He reviewed my chart, explained the test results, and confirmed what the nurse had already told me, a mild heart attack brought on by extreme stress and untreated hypertension. You're lucky, Mr. Hansen, he said, looking at me over his glasses. This was a warning, not a sentence. But you need to make some serious lifestyle changes. He scribbled on a prescription pad. Starting with these medications and regular checkups, and most importantly, reducing stress in your life. I almost laughed. Reduce stress? How does one reduce the stress of realizing you've become disposable to the person you love most in the world? I'll make sure he follows orders, James promised, taking the prescriptions and care instructions. Always my protector, even though he was the younger brother by 4 years. The doctor left, and James settled into the chair beside my bed. You're staying with me after they discharge you, he said, in a tone that brooked no argument. My guest room is already made up. I have my own home, I protested weakly. A home filled with reminders of a son who doesn't deserve you, he retorted. You need peace and quiet to recover, not constant triggers of Michael's ingratitude. I didn't have the energy to argue. Maybe he was right. Maybe I needed distance, not just from Michael, but from the life I'd built around him, a life that suddenly seemed hollow and one-sided. Morning came with a shift change and a breakfast tray I couldn't stomach. The cardiologist visited, explaining that while the damage was minimal, my recovery would require patience and a complete reevaluation of my priorities. Your heart has been working too hard for too long, he said kindly. It's time to let it rest. Around noon, as James was helping me pack the few personal items the paramedics had brought with me, there was a knock at the door. My pulse quickened, hope rising unbidden. Perhaps Michael had come after all, but it was Sophia who entered. Still in her going-away outfit from the reception, a cream-colored suit that made her look older than her 28 years. She carried a small bouquet of flowers, clearly plucked from one of the wedding arrangements. Thomas, she said, hovering uncertainly at the foot of my bed. How are you feeling? James's posture stiffened, his protective instincts flaring. Where's Michael? He demanded. Sophia shifted uncomfortably. He's finalizing some details with the venue, making sure everything's settled before our honeymoon. She placed the flowers on the bedside table. He sends his love, of course. Of course. Too busy with wedding details to visit his father in the hospital. The flowers, leftovers from his celebration, were meant to suffice. Thank you for coming, Sophia, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The flowers are lovely, she nodded, clearly relieved I wasn't going to make a scene. We're leaving for Bali tonight, 2 weeks away. She smiled, a practiced, camera-ready expression. Michael wanted me to check on you before we left, to make sure you were okay. Wanted her to check, not enough to come himself, but enough to send his proxy. I wondered if this would be the pattern of our relationship moving forward. Sophia as the mediator between father and son, carrying messages back and forth across the growing divide. Tell him I'm fine, I said, the lie coming easily after years of practice. And congratulations again on your marriage. I hope Bali is everything you dreamed. Sophia seemed relieved by my composure, perhaps having expected tears or recriminations. She leaned down to give me an awkward hug, her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming the hospital smells. We'll call when we get back, she promised. After she left, James exploded. "The nerve! Sending his wife instead of coming himself!" "And those pathetic flowers?" I saw better arrangements in the hospital gift shop. "It doesn't matter," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Something had shifted inside me during those unconscious hours. Some fundamental recalibration of what I was willing to accept. "None of it matters anymore." James studied my face with concern. "What are you saying, Thomas?" "I'm saying it's time for me to stop waiting for Michael to become the son I deserve and start being the man I've forgotten how to be." I looked out the window, where clouds were gathering for an afternoon storm. I collapsed at my son's wedding, and he kept dancing. If that's not a sign from the universe that I need to change direction, I don't know what is. The hospital discharged me the following day with a folder full of instructions, prescriptions, and follow-up appointments. James drove me to his home in Lakewood, a quiet suburb, 30 minutes from my own house. His place was smaller than mine, but infinitely more peaceful. A craftsman bungalow surrounded by tall pines and a workshop where he built custom furniture since retiring from architecture. "You can stay as long as you need," he said, showing me to the guest room. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with windows overlooking a small stream that ran along the property line. No timeline, no pressure. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion and gratitude. "Thank you, James, for everything." He squeezed my shoulder. "Get some rest. We'll figure out the next steps when you're stronger." The next 2 weeks passed in a gentle rhythm of recovery. Mornings on James's deck, afternoons reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years, evenings watching baseball or helping my brother in his workshop. The simplicity was healing in ways the medications couldn't touch. Michael didn't call. Not once during his honeymoon did he pick up the phone to check on the father who'd nearly died at his wedding. I told myself it didn't hurt anymore, but some nights I'd wake with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. James watched me carefully, offering support without prying. But one evening, as we sat on his deck watching fireflies emerge in the twilight, he broached the subject I'd been avoiding. "Have you thought about what comes next? After you're fully recovered?" I traced the rim of my water glass, considering. "I can't go back to how things were before. That much I know." "Your house?" he prompted gently. "Too big for just me. Too full of ghosts." I set the glass down decisively. "I think I'll sell it." James nodded, unsurprised. "And then?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with possibility. And then? What does a man of 57 do when he's suddenly freed from the gravitational pull of a relationship that's defined his existence for decades? "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but for the first time, that doesn't terrify me." I smiled at my brother. "I've spent my whole adult life being Michael's father. Maybe it's time to find out who Thomas is without that role consuming everything else." The next morning, I called a realtor, not the one who'd helped Michael and Sophia find their new home, but a man James recommended. Robert arrived that afternoon, notebook in hand, ready to discuss listing my house. "It's a great property," he assured me after I'd explained my situation. 4 bedrooms in that neighborhood will move quickly. "Do you know where you'll go next?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm keeping my options open." He smiled approvingly. "That's refreshing. Most clients already have their next place lined up, often before they're emotionally ready to leave the old one." His words struck a chord. How many decisions had I made while emotionally unprepared, simply because it seemed like the next expected step? Marriage at 23 because that's what successful relationships were supposed to lead to. Keeping a too large house after the divorce because Michael needed stability. Investing in my son's wedding even after he'd made it clear my presence was merely tolerated. "I think I'm done rushing into things," I told him. "This time, I want to move deliberately." Robert listed my house the following week. To my surprise, it sold within days. A young family with 3 children who fell in love with the backyard where Michael had once played. The closing was set for the end of the month, which gave me just enough time to sort through 3 decades of accumulated possessions. James helped me tackle the sorting process, creating piles for keeping, donating, selling, and trash. We worked methodically through each room, starting with the less emotional spaces like the guest bathroom and garage, before progressing to areas heavy with memories. Michael's old bedroom was the hardest. Though he'd moved out years ago, I'd preserved it like a museum, his high school trophies still on the shelves, his college pennant still on the wall. Now, looking at these artifacts with fresh eyes, I realized how one-sided this preservation had been. Michael hadn't asked me to maintain this shrine to his youth. He'd moved on without a backward glance. "You don't have to keep anything you don't want," James reminded me gently, watching as I hesitated over a box of his childhood photographs. "But what if someday he wants these things? What if he has children who might—" I trailed off, recognizing the familiar pattern of putting Michael's hypothetical future needs above my present reality. James took the box from my hands and set it aside. "If that day comes, you can share what you've chosen to keep because it matters to you, not because you think it should matter to him." The wisdom of his words sank in slowly. I was still caring for a child who no longer existed, neglecting the man I needed to become. With new resolve, I selected a handful of items that held genuine meaning for me. The ceramic handprint from kindergarten, the Father's Day card he'd made in 3rd grade when his teacher had to help him spell wonderful, the photo of us at his high school graduation, his smile untainted by the entitlement that would later consume him. The rest went into boxes labeled with his name, to be stored in James's garage until he decided whether he wanted them. I was done being the keeper of memories he didn't value. As the moving date approached, I still hadn't decided where to go next. James continued to assure me his guest room was mine for as long as I needed, but I sensed we both knew this arrangement was temporary, a healing pause, not a final destination. The answer came unexpectedly during my 6-week checkup with Dr. Reynolds. He reviewed my test results with approval, noting significant improvements in my blood pressure and overall cardiac health. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he encouraged. "Your heart is healing nicely." "I sold my house," I told him. "I'm staying with my brother while I figure out what's next." He looked up from his notes, studying me with interest. "Any ideas?" "Not really. I just know I need a fresh start." Dr. Reynolds smiled, setting down his clipboard. "Have you ever considered the mountains?" "I have a colleague who runs a wilderness therapy program in Colorado. They're looking for a program coordinator, someone organized, dependable, good with logistics." He tilted his head. "Someone exactly like you." "Me? But I don't have any experience in therapy or wilderness programs." "You raised a child alone, managed a household, planned events, and from what I understand, coordinated most of your son's wedding while being completely unappreciated for it." He raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like relevant experience to me." I laughed, surprised by his directness. "I haven't worked outside the home since Michael was in elementary school. Who would hire me?" "Let me make a call," he offered. The worst they can say is no. 2 days later, I found myself driving to Colorado for an interview with Dr. Reynolds' colleague, Dr. Martinez. The mountain highway wound through passes that took my breath away, the vastness of the landscape making my problems seem smaller with each passing mile. By the time I reached the therapy center, a cluster of rustic buildings nestled in a valley with views of snow-capped peaks, I felt a surging sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. Dr. Martinez was nothing like I'd imagined, a compact woman in her 50s with sun-weathered skin and a direct gaze that seemed to read more than you intended to reveal. She walked me through the facility, explaining their approach to wilderness therapy for troubled teens and young adults. "We believe healing happens in honest connection with nature and community," she explained, showing me a group of young people building a shelter together under the guidance of an instructor. "Our job is to create experiences where people feel both challenged and supported enough to grow beyond their perceived limitations." The position was perfect: organizing programs, coordinating logistics, helping ensure everything ran smoothly so the therapists and wilderness guides could focus on their work with clients. It wasn't just a job. It was a chance to transform my own pain into something useful, to find meaning in the collapse that had nearly ended my life. "When can you start?" Dr. Martinez asked at the end of our tour. I hesitated, momentarily overwhelmed by the speed at which my life was changing. "I'd need to find a place to live first," she nodded thoughtfully. "Actually, one of our staff cabins just became available. It's small, but it's right on the property. You could walk to work. The rent's reasonable, and it comes furnished. That afternoon, she showed me the cabin, a one-bedroom structure with wide windows facing the mountains and a small deck just big enough for a chair and a mug of morning coffee. It was a fraction of the size of my old house, but as I stood in the main room, listening to the wind in the pines, I felt something settle inside me. This could be home. I'll take it, I said, and the job. I can start next month, after the house closing. Driving back to James's that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years, despite the weight of decisions and changes pressing in from all sides. I was moving to Colorado, starting a new job, building a life that wasn't defined by my relationship with Michael. The realization brought both terror and exhilaration, the intoxicating vertigo of stepping off a familiar path into uncharted territory. James was thrilled when I told him, immediately volunteering to help with the move. "This is perfect for you, Thomas. The mountain air, meaningful work, a completely fresh start." Only one shadow darkened my newfound optimism. "I should tell Michael," I said, reaching for my phone. James's hand covered mine, stopping me. "Why? He hasn't called once since the wedding, not even to check if you're still alive." "He's my son," I said simply. He sighed, removing his hand. "Yes, he is, but maybe consider what kind of relationship you want with him going forward. One where you continue to give without receiving, or one with healthier boundaries." I thought about his words as I dialed Michael's number. What did I want from Michael now? Not his approval, certainly. Not even his gratitude for all I'd done. Perhaps just acknowledgement. Recognition that I existed as a person separate from my role as his father, with needs and dreams of my own. The call went to voicemail. Of course it did. "Michael, it's Dad," I said after the beep. "I wanted to let you know I'm moving to Colorado next month. I've accepted a position at a wilderness therapy center there. I'll send you my new address when I'm settled." I paused, then added, "I hope you and Sophia are well." Simple, factual, without expectation or emotional weight. He didn't call back that day, or the next. By the third day, I'd stopped checking my phone, focusing instead on the practical details of my impending move. There were utilities to disconnect, moving arrangements to finalize, goodbyes to say to neighbors who'd known me for decades. On the morning of the house closing, as I did a final walkthrough of the empty rooms that had witnessed so much of my life, my phone finally rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. "Dad?" His voice sounded uncertain, almost childlike. "You're moving? To Colorado?" "Yes," I confirmed, running my hand along the wall where I'd once marked his height with pencil marks, now painted over for the new owners. "I start my new job next week." "But," he faltered, "why didn't you tell me you were thinking about this? What about your house, my room, all my stuff?" Of course, not concern for me, but for the shrine I'd maintained to his childhood, the possessions he'd never bothered to claim but expected to remain preserved indefinitely. "Your things are boxed up at Uncle James's," I explained calmly. "You can pick them up whenever you like. The house has been sold to a lovely family with children who will actually live in it." "I can't believe you did this without consulting me," he said, indignation creeping into his tone. "What if Sophia and I needed to stay there sometime? What if we needed help with a down payment for a bigger place?" And there it was. The assumption that my resources, my home, my very life existed primarily as a safety net for his convenience. The old Thomas would have apologized, would have offered reassurances and perhaps even a check. The new Thomas felt a surprising calm. "Michael," I said quietly, "I collapsed at your wedding, and you kept dancing. I think we both need to acknowledge what that means for our relationship going forward." Silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken recriminations and realizations. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. "Dad, that's not fair. It was my wedding day. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to care, Michael. Just that. Nothing more, nothing less." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for words that needed saying. "I've spent 30 years putting you first. Your needs, your wants, your convenience. Now I'm choosing to put myself first for whatever time I have left. I hope someday you'll understand that's not abandonment. It's simply balance, long overdue." More silence, then a huff of frustration. "So you're punishing me?" "No," I said gently. "I'm loving myself enough to walk away from a relationship that had become entirely one-sided. The cabin in Colorado has one bedroom, Michael, Just enough space for me. If you and Sophia want to visit someday, there are lovely hotels nearby. If you need financial help, there are banks that offer loans. I'll always be your father, but I'm also a man with his own life to live. I could practically hear him struggling to process this shift, this redrawing of boundaries he'd never had to respect before. Finally, he sighed. I guess I should say congratulations on the new job then. It wasn't an apology or an acknowledgement of his behavior at the wedding. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was a step, a small recognition that my life could change without his permission or approval. Thank you, I said. I should go now. The new owners will be arriving soon. Okay, a pause. Take care of yourself, Dad. I will, I promised, meaning it more deeply than he could know. That's exactly what I'm learning to do. I ended the call and took one last look around the empty house that had contained so much of my history. Then I walked out the front door, leaving my key on the kitchen counter for the new family who would fill these rooms with their own stories, their own joys and heartbreaks. James was waiting in his truck at the curb, ready to drive me to Colorado and help settle me into my cabin in the mountains. As I slid into the passenger seat, he studied my face. How are you feeling? I thought about Michael, about the house, about the heart attack that had nearly taken my life but had instead given me a second chance at living it on my own terms. I feel, I said slowly, searching for the right word, unburdened. He smiled, understanding exactly what I meant. Well then, he said, starting the engine, let's go find out what an unburdened Thomas looks like. We drove away from my old life, heading toward the mountains and whatever waited beyond the horizon. My heart, so recently broken in more ways than one, beat steadily in my chest, stronger now, and finally beating for itself. The Colorado mountain cabin felt like a revelation, unfamiliar yet instantly right, as if some part of me had been waiting for this place without knowing it existed. My first morning there, I woke before dawn and stepped onto the small deck, a steaming mug of coffee warming my hands against the mountain chill. The stars were just beginning to fade as the eastern sky lightened, painting the mountain peaks in gold and rose. By the time the sun crested the ridge, illuminating the valley in brilliant light, I knew with certainty that this was where I belonged. My job at the Wilderness Therapy Center began the following Monday. Dr. Martinez introduced me to the staff, a diverse group of therapists, guides, instructors, and support personnel, before walking me through my responsibilities. After decades focused solely on family life, the professional environment felt both intimidating and exhilarating. There were systems to learn, protocols to memorize, and a unique organizational culture to understand. But beneath the initial discomfort lay a profound sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since Michael was young. You're catching on remarkably fast, Dr. Martinez commented at the end of my first month as we reviewed the complex scheduling matrix I'd created for the upcoming programs. Most people take twice as long to get comfortable with our systems. I've had years of practice coordinating complicated logistics, I replied, thinking of all the soccer tournaments, college applications, and most recently, a wedding I'd orchestrated without acknowledgement. This feels similar, just with a clearer purpose. She nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly right. What we're doing here isn't just scheduling wilderness expeditions and therapy sessions. We're creating structured opportunities for transformation. She leaned against her desk, studying me. You know, Thomas, I think you understand our mission on a deeper level than some staff who've been here for years. The compliment warmed me, not because I needed external validation. I was learning to cultivate that from within, but because it confirmed I was contributing something meaningful. After years of pouring myself into a relationship that drained rather than nourished me, I was finally channeling my energy in directions that multiplied rather than depleted it. The young clients quickly became the heart of my experience at the center. Most were troubled teens or young adults struggling with addiction, behavioral issues, or emotional trauma. Many had strained relationships with their parents. Some neglected, others suffocated by expectations. I recognized pieces of my own story in theirs, in their defiance masking profound hurt, in their desperate search for identity separate from family expectations. We were all trying to rediscover ourselves beneath the layers of roles we'd accumulated. One afternoon, as I was organizing equipment in the storage shed, a knock came at the open door. I looked up to see Jason, an 18-year-old client who'd been at the center for about 6 weeks. Tall and lanky, with perpetually hunched shoulders, he'd arrived angry and withdrawn after a suspension from college for substance abuse. "Need any help?" he asked, hovering in the doorway. "Actually, yes," I said, gesturing to the climbing gear I was inventorying. If you're free, I could use a hand sorting these carabiners by type. Jason joined me, working methodically and silently for several minutes before speaking again. I'm going back next week, he said. Home, I mean. Then back to school for summer classes. I nodded, giving him my full attention. How are you feeling about that? Scared, he admitted, his hands still moving through the equipment. What if I mess up again? What if nothing's really changed? The question revealed the universal fear behind all major transitions. How do we know transformation is real? How can we trust ourselves after disappointment? Change isn't a single moment, I said carefully. It's a series of choices you make every day. The fact that you're asking these questions shows you're already different from the person who arrived here. Jason looked up, his expression skeptical but hopeful. My dad thinks this was all a waste of money. Says I just needed discipline, not expensive mountain therapy. I felt a familiar twinge, the easy judgment of parents who believe strength means never showing vulnerability. Sometimes people confuse toughness with resilience, I said. True resilience comes from knowing yourself deeply enough to recognize when you need support. How do you know all this stuff? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I smiled ruefully. I collapsed at my son's wedding. He kept dancing. Sometimes life has to knock you flat before you realize you've been standing in the wrong place. My conversations with clients like Jason became anchors in my new life. Moments of connection that reminded me why starting over at 57 wasn't just necessary but vital. I began to see my heart attack not as a bodily betrayal, but as a profound act of self-preservation. My heart had literally stopped me from continuing down a path that was slowly killing me. The cabin became my sanctuary. Each weekend I added small touches that made it distinctly mine. A woven blanket purchased from a local artisan, photographs of mountain wildflowers I'd taken during my hikes, books that had languished unread on my shelves for years. I kept things intentionally minimal, valuing space and light over the accumulation of objects that had characterized my previous home. James visited after my first 3 months, marveling at the transformation he saw in me. You look younger, he declared one evening as we sat on my deck watching the sunset paint the mountains in vibrant orange and purple. It's not just the elevation, though that doesn't hurt. It's something in your posture, your eyes, a confidence. I feel more present, I admitted, like I've been sleepwalking for years and finally woke up. He raised his beer bottle in a toast. You know what I think? I think fathers often confuse sacrifice with love. We believe the more we give up, the more we love. But real love shouldn't diminish us. It should help us become more fully ourselves. His words stayed with me long after he'd returned home. Had I confused sacrifice with love? Had I taught Michael, through my own example, that love meant martyrdom rather than mutual growth? Perhaps my greatest failure as a father hadn't been setting boundaries too firmly but setting them too late. 6 months into my new life, as winter wrapped the mountains in pristine white, I received a text from Sophia. Would it be okay if we visited sometime? Michael won't ask, but I think he should see you. I sat with the message for a full day before responding. The old Thomas would have immediately rearranged his schedule, prepared elaborate meals, planned activities to fill every moment. The new Thomas considered what he actually wanted. A weekend visit would be nice, I finally replied. The guest accommodations at the center are simple but comfortable. Let me know if that works for you. Sophia responded quickly with a date 2 weeks away. I marked it on my calendar without anxiety or excessive anticipation. Just another event in a life that had become satisfyingly full on its own terms. The morning of their arrival brought heavy snow, blanketing the valley in hushed white. I stood on the porch of my cabin watching it fall, breathing deeply, centering myself in the present moment rather than projecting into a future laden with expectations. Whatever happened with Michael today, reconciliation, continued distance, something in between, I would remain anchored in the life I was building, not the one I'd left behind. I spotted their rental SUV coming up the winding road to the center, moving cautiously on the snow-covered pavement. They parked near the main lodge, and I watched as they emerged, Michael helping Sophia navigate the slippery path, both bundled against the cold they weren't accustomed to. He looked different somehow. Thinner, his posture less rigid, his movements more deliberate. "Dad," he said when they reached me, his breath visible in the cold air. The word hung between us, laden with months of silence, and years of misunderstanding. Michael? Sophia? Welcome. I embraced Sophia warmly, then turned to my son. We hugged briefly, awkwardly, like distant relatives at a funeral rather than father and son. "This place is beautiful," Sophia said, her eyes taking in the snow-covered valley and mountain peaks. "So peaceful." "It is," I agreed. "Let me show you to your cabin. Then we can have lunch in the main lodge." As we walked, I pointed out the different buildings, the therapy spaces, the equipment shed, the meeting hall. Michael remained quiet, taking it all in with an expression I couldn't quite read. After settling them into their cabin, I led them to the lodge, where lunch was being served. "You actually work here?" Michael finally asked as we sat at a table near the stone fireplace. "Like, a real job?" The question revealed how little he'd imagined a life for me beyond my role as his father. "I do," I said simply. "I coordinate logistics for the therapy programs. Make sure everything runs smoothly." "And you live in that small cabin we passed?" The incredulity in his voice was unmistakable. "I do," I confirmed. "It's perfect for me. Everything I need, nothing I don't." He shook his head slightly, as if trying to reconcile this reality with whatever he'd imagined. "It's just so different from what I expected." "What did you expect, Michael?" He hesitated, picking at his food. "I don't know. That you'd be miserable, I guess. Alone in some depressing apartment, regretting everything." The honesty of his answer struck me. He'd imagined me defined by his absence, diminished without him. The reality that I had built a meaningful life independent of my relationship with him seemed to both confuse and unsettle him. "I'm sorry to disappoint you," I said, not unkindly, "but I'm happier here than I've been in years." "I can see that," Sophia interjected, placing her hand on Michael's arm. "You look wonderful, Thomas. There's a lightness about you." After lunch, I gave them a tour of the center, explaining the wilderness therapy program and introducing them to colleagues we encountered. Michael said little, but I noticed him watching intently as I interacted with staff and clients, seeing me, perhaps for the first time, as someone with skills and relationships completely separate from him. That evening, I prepared a simple dinner in my cabin. The conversation remained cautious, circling around safe topics, their jobs, the weather, news from the hometown I'd left behind. As we finished eating, Sophia excused herself to take a call from her mother, leaving Michael and me alone for the first time. He stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains now silvered by moonlight. "Why here?" he asked suddenly. "Of all places you could have gone, why a wilderness therapy center in the middle of nowhere?" I joined him at the window, keeping a respectful distance, because it was as far from my old life as I could imagine, because it offered purpose beyond myself, because these mountains don't care who I am or what I've done. They simply exist, inviting me to do the same. He turned to face me, his expression troubled. "You make it sound so simple." "It wasn't," I admitted. "The first month here, I woke up every morning terrified I'd made a horrible mistake. Leaving everything familiar, even when it's hurting you, takes courage most people never find." "Is that what I did?" he asked quietly. "Hurt you?" The question hung in the air between us, honest in a way our conversations rarely were. "Yes," I said simply. "For a long time." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I've been seeing someone," he said after a moment. "A therapist." Sophia insisted after the wedding. I waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "She says I have issues with emotional attachment, that I push people away when they get too close. His voice caught slightly, that I learned to equate love with material support rather than emotional presence." The insight hit me with the force of recognition. Of course. How much of Michael's behavior had been shaped by my own example? How many times had I substituted financial support for emotional vulnerability, believing that providing was the same as connecting? "Your therapist sounds insightful," I said carefully. He laughed, a short, pained sound. "She says I'm angry at you for staying, for trying so hard. That it would have been easier if you'd been a typical absent father I could righteously hate." He looked at me directly. "How messed up is that?" "It makes a certain sense," I said slowly. It's harder to justify your anger when the person you're angry at keeps showing up, keeps trying, so you move the goalposts, find new reasons to push them away. That's exactly what she said. He shook his head, looking genuinely surprised. Have you been talking to her or something? I smiled slightly. No, but I've had a lot of time to think about our relationship, about the patterns we fell into. Sophia returned then, her presence shifting the energy in the room. We moved to sit by the fire, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Yet something had changed. A door had opened between Michael and me, allowing a glimpse of honesty neither of us had been brave enough to offer before. The next day I took them hiking on one of the easier trails that remained accessible despite the snow. The physical activity seemed to loosen something in Michael, away from the intensity of direct conversation. Walking single file through the pristine forest, he began to talk more freely. I'm thinking about changing careers, he said as we paused at a lookout point. The valley spread below us like a Christmas card. Banking isn't. It's not what I thought it would be. What are you considering instead? I asked, genuinely curious. He hesitated, as if expecting judgment. Teaching, maybe. History or economics at the high school level. The revelation surprised me. Michael had always chased prestige, measuring success in salary and status. That's a significant change. Yeah, well, he kicked at the snow with his boot. Turns out money doesn't fix everything, contrary to what I said at the wedding. The reference to his cruel words hung in the air between us. Neither of us spoke for a moment, the silence filled only by the soft sound of wind through pine branches. I'm sorry, Dad, he finally said, still looking out at the valley rather than at me. For what I said, for how I treated you, for... He gestured vaguely. For all of it. The apology was simple, unembellished, all the more powerful for its directness. Thank you, I said quietly. That means a lot. When you collapsed at the reception, he continued, his voice tight, I didn't know what to do. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how I'd react. So I just kept going, like if I pretended everything was fine, it would be. He finally turned to look at me. I knew it was wrong, even as I was doing it, but I couldn't stop the performance. I nodded, understanding more than he realized. How many times had I done the same? Kept up appearances, maintained the facade of the perfect father, even as something essential withered inside me. We both got caught in roles that stopped serving us, I said. The difference is, I had a heart attack that forced me to change. You're choosing to change on your own. That takes more courage. He looked startled by this perspective, then thoughtful. Sophia, who had been giving us space while taking photographs of the mountains, rejoined us then. She slipped her arm through Michael's, a gesture of support that spoke volumes about their relationship. It's beautiful here, she said simply. I can see why you stayed. That evening, as they prepared to leave the next morning, Michael asked if he could speak with me alone. Sophia graciously offered to finish packing, leaving us on the small deck of my cabin, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. I don't know how to do this, he said after a long silence. How to have a relationship with you that isn't what it was before. I don't either, I admitted, but I think that's okay. We're both learning. He nodded, considering this. My therapist suggested something, a kind of reset. Starting from where we are now, not trying to fix the past. That sounds wise. So maybe we could talk every couple of weeks. Regular calls, nothing dramatic. Just staying connected. He spoke hesitantly, as if afraid of rejection. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. And maybe in the summer, you could visit us. We bought a house. Nothing fancy, but there's a guest room. He paused. Or we could come back here, if that's easier for you. The offer held none of the entitlement that had characterized our relationship for so long. It was a genuine invitation, with space for my preference. Both, I said. Let's plan for both. We sat in companionable silence then, watching the moon rise over the mountains. Not the easy closeness we might have had in a different reality, but something honest and new, a relationship being built consciously, with awareness of its fragility and potential. When they left the next morning, our goodbye was neither emotional nor distant, simply a pause in an ongoing conversation. I watched their car wind down the mountain road, feeling not the wrenching loss I might have expected, but a quiet hope. Something was beginning, not ending. Spring came to the mountains with startling swiftness. Snow melting to reveal meadows erupting in wildflowers, streams swollen with runoff, wildlife emerging with new offspring. I found myself hiking farther each weekend, drawn by the metaphor of the landscape's renewal. Michael called every other Sunday, as promised. Our conversations started awkwardly. Neither of us quite sure how to relate without our established patterns, but gradually found a rhythm. I learned about his exploration of teaching credentials, his volunteer work at a local high school. He asked about my work, my hikes, the books I was reading. We were getting to know each other as adults, perhaps for the first time. One Sunday in late May, almost a year after his wedding, he called outside our regular schedule. My heart jumped with instinctive worry when I saw his name on my phone. "Michael, is everything okay, Dad?" His voice sounded different, tight with emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "We're pregnant. Sophia's pregnant. You're gonna be a grandfather." The news hit me with unexpected force. A grandchild. A new life, a new relationship, uncomplicated by our history. That's wonderful news," I said, my voice catching. "How's Sophia feeling?" "Morning sickness, but otherwise good. She's due in December." He paused. "We want you involved, Dad. Really involved. Not just visits at Christmas, but a real relationship." The offer pierced something deep inside me, a wound I hadn't realized was still raw. "I'd like that very much," I managed to say. "I've been thinking a lot about how I want to be as a father," he continued, his voice thoughtful. "About what I want to keep from how you raised me, and what I want to do differently." "That's exactly as it should be," I said. "Taking what works, leaving what doesn't." "The thing is," he said hesitantly, "there's a lot more I want to keep than I realized. Your patience, your consistency, the way you showed up, even when I was pushing you away." He took a deep breath. "I just hope I can be half the father you were." The words washed over me like mountain snowmelt, bracing, cleansing, life-giving, not because I needed his validation, but because they revealed his growth, his capacity to see beyond his own hurt to a larger truth about our imperfect human connection. "You'll be your own kind of father," I said when I could trust my voice again. "And that's exactly what your child will need." After we hung up, I walked out onto my deck, looking up at the mountains that had held me through this year of transformation. A year ago, I had collapsed at my son's wedding, my heart literally breaking under the weight of unmet expectations and unexpressed pain. He had kept dancing, continuing the performance we'd both been trapped in for too long. Now, standing in the clear mountain air, I realized that collapse had been the most profound gift, forcing us both to confront the hollow center of our relationship and begin building something authentic in its place. Not perfect, not without its scars and faults, but real, alive, growing. I placed my hand over my heart, feeling its steady, resilient beat. A heart that had stopped to save me from a life half-lived. A heart now strong enough to love without depleting itself, to give without expecting return, to beat fully and freely for whatever time remained. The mountain stood witness, unchanging yet ever-changing, reminding me that transformation is not a single moment but a continuing journey. My son was dancing again, but this time to a new rhythm, one that made space for authentic connection, for mutual growth, for the messy, beautiful truth of being human together. And this time, I would be there to dance alongside him, each of us moving to our own music while creating something harmonious together. Not because one of us had collapsed, but because both of us had finally learned to stand on our own. The winter air stung my cheeks as I stood on the hospital's rooftop garden, gazing at the snow-capped mountains that had become my sanctuary over the past 18 months. December had arrived with unusual ferocity, dropping temperatures and piling snow across Colorado like nature's urgent reminder of its power. Inside, just 3 floors below, my grandson was being born. I'd driven through the night when Michael's panicked call came. Sophia in labor 6 weeks early, complications requiring an emergency C-section. Now, as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, I waited in this suspended moment between fear and hope. "Mr. Hansen?" A nurse appeared at the rooftop entrance, her face impossible to read beneath her mask. "They're asking for you downstairs." My heart stuttered with momentary dread before she added, "Everyone's stable, mother, father, and baby boy." The elevator descent seemed to take hours, though it was mere seconds. I found myself outside a recovery room, where Michael stood in the hallway, his face a complex map of exhaustion, terror, and wonder. When he saw me, something released in his expression. "Dad," he said simply, then crossed the space between us in 3 strides. The hug he gave me wasn't brief or awkward. It was the fierce embrace of a man experiencing the most profound vulnerability of his life. I held him tightly, feeling his shoulders shake with quiet sobs. "He's so small," Michael whispered when he finally pulled back. 4 pounds, 7 ounces. They have him in the NICU. Sophia's sleeping finally. It was. He shook his head, words failing. "I know," I said. Though of course I didn't. Not this specific fear, this particular helplessness. But I knew what it was to love someone so deeply that their fragility became your own greatest terror. "I've never been so scared," he admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair, standing there, watching them work on Sophia, hearing the monitors, not knowing if they were both going to be okay. His voice cracked. "Is this what it's like, being a parent?" I nodded slowly. "This is part of it, the part no one can prepare you for. How completely your heart lives outside your body once you have a child." "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," he confessed, his eyes meeting mine with rare vulnerability. "What if I mess it up? What if I turn out to be a terrible father?" The question hung between us, weighted with our complicated history. I could have offered platitudes, could have assured him he'd be fine. But in this raw moment, only truth would serve. "You will mess up," I said gently. "We all do. Being a good father isn't about perfection. It's about showing up after the mistakes. It's about being brave enough to keep trying, to keep learning." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "And you won't be doing it alone." Something shifted in his expression, a subtle realignment, as if pieces that had been jarring against each other finally settled into place. He nodded once, decisively, then asked, "Do you want to meet your grandson?" The NICU was a hushed world of beeping monitors and whispered conversations. Michael led me to a small incubator where a tiny being lay connected to various tubes and sensors. My grandson. So impossibly small, yet so complete. Miniature fingers, a button nose, dark hair like his father's had been. "Thomas James Hansen," Michael said softly. "After you and Uncle James." The name hit me with unexpected force. After years of feeling erased from my son's life, here was my name carried forward, woven into this new generation. Not out of obligation or tradition, but as a deliberate choice. "We can call him TJ," he continued, misinterpreting my silence as disapproval. "If you'd prefer." "No," I managed, my voice thick. "Thomas is perfect. He's perfect." Michael smiled then, a genuine expression untainted by the performative confidence he'd hidden behind for so long. "The doctors say he's strong. Fighters," they called both him and Sophia. He looked at me directly. "Must run in the family." The next 3 weeks unfolded in a blur of hospital rooms, coffee from vending machines, and the gradual strengthening of tiny TJ. I extended my leave from the Wilderness Center, renting a small apartment near the hospital so Michael and Sophia could take shifts at home to rest, while I maintained the vigil at the NICU. We fell into a rhythm of care that transcended the awkwardness that had characterized our relationship for so long, united now by common purpose, by shared love for this small fighting life. One evening, as I sat beside the incubator reading aloud from The Wind in the Willows, the same book I'd read to Michael decades ago, a neonatologist I hadn't met before paused during her rounds. "Grandfather?" she asked, smiling at the scene. "Yes," I said, the words still new enough to send a small thrill through me. "You're doing important work," she said, checking TJ's vitals. "Studies show premature babies respond strongly to familiar voices. It helps regulate their nervous systems, promotes brain development." She glanced at the monitors. "His numbers always improve when someone's talking or reading to him." "Really?" I looked down at the tiny face, searching for signs of recognition. "Absolutely. Babies this young can't process words, but they recognize voice patterns, especially ones they heard in utero." She made a note in his chart. He knows your family. He knows your family. The phrase echoed in my mind long after she'd moved on to the next incubator. What a profound truth contained in those simple words. That recognition transcends understanding, that connection begins before comprehension, that family is felt before it's known. When TJ was finally strong enough to be discharged, still tiny but breathing independently, feeding well, and gaining weight steadily, Michael and Sophia invited me to stay with them for a few weeks to help with the transition home. Their house, a modest craftsman in a quiet neighborhood, had been hastily prepared for a baby who wasn't expected until February. The nursery remained half-painted, furniture unassembled, supplies disorganized. "We thought we had more time," Sophia explained apologetically as she showed me to the guest room. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of her exhaustion, her body still recovering from major surgery while adapting to the demands of a newborn. "Then it's lucky I'm here," I said simply. "I'm pretty good with a paintbrush, and I've assembled my share of furniture." Over the next few days, as Sophia and Michael focused on the delicate routine of caring for TJ, I quietly completed the nursery, finishing the soft blue paint job, assembling the crib and changing table, organizing the tiny clothes and seemingly endless supplies. It felt like a form of prayer, this practical expression of love through service. One afternoon, as I was hanging blackout curtains, Michael appeared in the doorway with TJ cradled against his chest. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, surveying the transformed room. "I wanted to." I stepped down from the stepladder, dusting off my hands. "It's what family does." "You know what I keep thinking about?" he asked, gently swaying to keep TJ content. "That day at my wedding, when you collapsed. How I just kept dancing." His voice caught. "What kind of person does that?" "A young man who was scared." I said carefully, "Who didn't know how to handle a situation that threatened the perfect day he'd imagined." He shook his head. "I was selfish, cruel." "Yes," I agreed, not sugarcoating the truth. "In that moment, you were." "We all have moments we're not proud of, Michael. The question is what we learn from them." He looked down at TJ, sleeping peacefully against him. I keep imagining if something happened to him, how nothing else would matter. Not appearances, not what people thought, nothing. He met my gaze directly. "I don't think I understood until now what it means to love someone more than yourself." The honesty of his words created a bridge between us, not erasing the past, but acknowledging it while building something new beside it. "That's the great paradox of parenthood," I said. "It's the most selfish and selfless thing simultaneously. You create this being who is part of you, a continuation of yourself, and then spend the rest of your life putting their needs before your own." "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you gave up for me," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry I didn't teach you earlier that love isn't just sacrifice," I replied. "It's also boundaries, honesty, allowing each other to be fully human, mistakes and all." TJ stirred against Michael's chest, making the small grunting noises that preceded hunger. "I should get him to Sophia," Michael said. But before leaving, he added, "Thank you for the nursery, for being here, for giving me another chance." "Thank you for the same," I said simply. As the weeks passed, I watched Michael and Sophia navigate the beautiful chaos of new parenthood. The sleepless nights, the constant adjustments, the overwhelming love mixed with moments of utter terror. I saw Michael struggling against his perfectionist tendencies, learning to embrace the messy reality rather than the idealized version of fatherhood he'd imagined. I saw Sophia finding her confidence as a mother, her natural intuition gradually overriding the anxiety of those first precarious weeks. And I discovered a new role for myself, not the primary caregiver as I'd been with Michael, but a supportive presence offering practical help, occasional advice when asked, and most importantly, space for them to find their own way as parents. "How did you do this alone?" Michael asked one night, as we sat on the porch after finally getting TJ to sleep following a particularly challenging evening of colic. "I can barely manage with Sophia and you both helping." "One day at a time," I said honestly, "some days better than others." And I wasn't always alone. I had friends, neighbors who helped. I hesitated, then added, "But there were many times I wished I'd asked for more help, admitted when I was struggling instead of trying to maintain the illusion of having everything under control." He nodded slowly. "I'm trying to be more honest about when I'm lost. It doesn't come naturally. I can't imagine where you got that from," I said dryly, and we both laughed. a moment of shared self-recognition that felt like healing. As January turned to February, the time approached for me to return to my life in the mountains. The Wilderness Center had been gracious about my extended absence, but programs were ramping up for the spring season. Though I'd grown comfortable in my role as live-in grandfather, I recognized the importance of giving the new family space to establish their own rhythms. The evening before my departure, as snowflakes drifted past the windows, Michael surprised me with a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "It's not much," he said as I opened it. "Just something I wanted you to have." Inside was a handcrafted wooden frame containing a photograph taken in the NICU in his incubator, my weathered hand reaching through the opening to touch his tiny fingers. On the back, Michael had written simply, "The strongest men know when to hold on and when to let go." Sophia took it that first day, he explained. I didn't notice until later how perfectly it captured everything. I studied the image, seeing what he meant. The contrast between my aged hand and TJ's new one, the gentle connection, the medical equipment representing both fragility and resilience. It was us, all of us, in a single frame. The past touching the future, letting go and holding on simultaneously. "Thank you," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I'll keep it on my desk at the center." "That's the thing," Michael said hesitantly. "We've been talking, Sophia and we have a proposal." He took a deep breath. "We'd like you to consider moving closer. Not living with us, necessarily, but nearby. There's actually a small house for sale, just 3 blocks over." The offer caught me completely off guard. "What about your life in Colorado? The center?" "They'd understand. And there are wilderness programs near here too if that's where your heart is now." He paused. "Obviously, I know you have your own life, your own community there. I'm not asking you to give that up. Just consider the possibility." The old Thomas would have immediately said yes, would have prioritized his role as grandfather and father above all other aspects of his identity. But the man I'd become recognized the importance of thoughtful decisions, of not sacrificing one kind of wholeness for another. "I need to think about it," I said honestly. "Not because I don't want to be close to you and TJ, but because important choices deserve careful consideration." He nodded, accepting this without the defensive reaction that would have characterized our old dynamic. "That's fair. Just know the offer stands, whatever you decide." That night I stood on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed, watching the snow transform the ordinary neighborhood into something magical and new. The question before me wasn't simple. It wasn't just about geography, but about the kind of life I wanted to build in this next chapter. The mountains had healed me, had offered space and perspective when I most needed it. The Wilderness Center had given me purpose, community, and a way to transform my own pain into service. These weren't small gifts to set aside. Yet here was another kind of healing on offer. The chance to be present for my grandson's childhood, to rebuild the relationship with my son on more honest terms, to create a family story with a different ending than the one that had seemed inevitable 18 months ago when I collapsed at Michael's wedding. Perhaps the real question wasn't which life to choose, but whether I could create something new that honored both parts of who I'd become. The independent man who'd found his strength in the mountains, and the father and grandfather whose heart expanded with each day spent in the presence of his family. The answer came to me, not as a flash of insight, but as a quiet certainty. I didn't have to choose between wholeness and connection. The very journey that had taught me to stand firmly in my own worth had also prepared me to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than dependency or obligation. When I returned to Colorado the next day, it wasn't to pack up my life but to transition it, to speak with Dr. Martinez about moving to a part-time consulting role that would allow me to divide my time between the mountains and Michael's city, to find someone to care for my cabin during my absences, to say proper goodbyes to the community that had held me through my transformation. 3 months later, I moved into the small house 3 blocks from Michael and Sophia, not the primary caregiver, not the financially supportive but emotionally distant father I'd once been, but a man fully present in his own life while making space for deep connection with others. TJ's first birthday arrived with unexpected swiftness. No longer the fragile preemie fighting for his place in the world, he had blossomed into a robust, curious toddler with Michael's intense focus and Sophia's easy laugh. The party was small. Family and a few close friends gathered in the backyard under strings of lights as the summer evening softened around us. As I watched Michael carefully guiding TJ's hand to blow out the single candle on his cake, I thought about the long, winding path that had led us here. From the wounded father collapsing at his son's wedding, to this moment of simple joy, this ordinary miracle of 3 generations together. "Penny for your thoughts," James said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of bourbon. My brother had flown in for the occasion, his presence a reminder of the constants that had sustained me through the upheavals of the past 2 years. "I was just thinking about hearts," I said, accepting the drink. "How mine had to stop to make me see what I was missing. How it had to break to learn how to beat properly." James nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. "And now?" I watched as Michael lifted TJ high above his head. The toddler's delighted giggles cutting through the evening air. Sophia caught my eye across the yard and raised her glass in a small toast, acknowledging our shared love for these 2 males who connected us. "Now it's just beating," I said simply. "Not perfectly, not without scars, but steadily, honestly." "To honest hearts," James said, clinking his glass against mine. "And to dancing," I added, "but only when the music's worth it." Later, as the party wound down and guests departed, I found myself alone with TJ for a few moments, while Michael and Sophia said their goodbyes. He stood at the coffee table, his small hands gripping the edge for balance, bouncing slightly to the faint music still playing from the outdoor speakers. "Are you dancing, buddy?" I asked, crouching down to his level. He grinned, showing his 4 tiny teeth, and bounced more deliberately. "That's right," I encouraged. "Dance to your own rhythm. That's the secret to everything." He reached for me suddenly, his small arms outstretched in unmistakable invitation. I lifted him carefully, holding him secure against my chest as I swayed gently to the music. His head eventually came to rest on my shoulder, his breathing gradually slowing as sleep began to claim him. Michael found us like that a few minutes later, his son asleep in my arms, both of us moving in slow circles to music only we could hear. He didn't speak, just watched with an expression of such open vulnerability that it caught in my throat. Sometimes the most profound healing doesn't announce itself with dramatic gestures or eloquent speeches. Sometimes it arrives in ordinary moments. A sleeping child, a quiet dance, a father and son finding their way back to each other through the simplest acts of presence. The heart that had once stopped in pain now beat steady and true, marking time for this dance that would continue long after I was gone. Grandfather to father to son, each learning from the other's missteps, each finding their own rhythm while creating something beautiful together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.